Another step towards another Bush versus another Clinton in the race for U.S. president. 16 years after his dad was unseated by her husband, Jeb Bush officially announcing his run for the 2016 Republican nomination and the chance to take on the Democratic frontrunner in the fall. The former Florida governor has the experience, the money, and as brother and son of former presidents, he certainly has the connections to win. Polls, though, suggest Jeb Bush could be vulnerable. We'll see why and pay particular attention to the Republican Party. His core supporters count fewer and fewer moderates. That center ground may be shrinking, but it's still where the election will be won. And just as Jeb faces the challenge of distancing himself from her brother, who ended up as an unpopular president, Hillary Clinton needs to breathe new life into a power couple that's been around Washington now for a long time indeed. The prospect of another Bush v. Clinton matchup, also the chance to see how much the United States has changed, not just since 1992, but since 2008, when Barack Obama came to office, promising change. If there's voter disappointment with politicians of all stripes, what policies can we expect from a slightly apathetic, increasingly fragmented U.S. electorate on, say, engagement in places like Syria and Iraq, free trade with Asia and Europe, and relations with Russia and China? Today in the France 24 debate, could it be Bush v. Clinton next year? With us to talk about it from Washington, Josh Kraushaar, political editor for the National Journal, who pens the weekly Against the Grain column. Always a pleasure to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us from Tallahassee, Florida, Rick Wilson, strategist for the Republican Party. Rick, give it to us straight, because I know there's two candidates in the race in your state. Who do you prefer, Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush?
Well, actually, there are 4 candidates from Florida. Mike Huckabee and Ben Carson also live in Florida, although they're much less likely to be in that final top tier. Listen, I have tremendous respect for Governor Bush, and and tremendous respect for Senator Rubio. I'm, from both of those worlds. So it's like a lot of people right now, they're looking at, who is going to be the guy who can shape up to be the person who posts up against Hillary Clinton in the national election, and the person who's got a sort of prospective, optimistic, forward-looking campaign in them that's not going to just be a sort of doom and gloom version of the Republican Party, but it's instead going to be something that does energize and motivate voters after a very long period of Democratic dominance in the White House. Oh,
sounds like Rick Wilson's hedging his bets still for the time being. We're going to ask, is Stuart Haugen, former chair of Republicans Abroad France, are you hedging your bets as well?
I wouldn't say I'm hedging my bets. I would say I just don't have a confirmed point of view yet. I think it's Jeb Bush enters the race with a tremendous amount of assets and a tremendous amount of capabilities. Is he just one too many, one bridge too far for the Bush family, and/or are his positions going to work in the primaries?
We're going to broach those questions in our discussion, and we'll also welcome Laetitia Vito, who teaches at the prestigious Sciences Po Political Science Institute, teaches U.S. politics. Welcome back to the show as well.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. He's often described as the Bush who was supposed to follow in his dad's footsteps first. Jeb making that Monday announcement in Miami. Laurent Berstacher has the story.
A speech delivered before a cheering audience, it was a moment Jeb Bush had been preparing for the past 6 months.
Our country's on a very bad course, and the question is, what are we going to do about it? And I've decided I'm a candidate for President of the United States of America.
The son and brother of 2 former presidents, Jeb Bush insists he is his own man. But with 11 candidates to the Republican nomination, his best chance to stand out could still be his last name.
Probably having that Bush name, could hurt him in some ways, but at the same time, voters tend to like successful political families. They have rewarded them in many cases.
His political connections already helped him shatter fundraising records, yet in his campaign logo, something is missing. A decision to distance himself from his family's legacy that could be detrimental to Jeb Bush's fledgling presidential ambitions. At a time where he needs to rally conservative voters for the Republican primaries, he has been sending a more liberal message, focusing on minorities and the underprivileged.
My core beliefs start with the premise that the most vulnerable in our society should be in the front of the line, not the back.
And while detailed policy questions are said to be his strength, he has recently struggled to clearly state his opinion on the war in Iraq.
If we're all supposed to answer hypothetical questions, knowing what we know now, what would you have done? I would have not engaged. I would not have gone into Iraq. It was worth it for those families. It was worth it for the people that made major sacrifices.
Jeb Bush's moderate positions have made him an easy target within the GOP. Some are already calling him a Republican Obama. His campaign will want to focus on his track record as governor of Florida, but it may not be enough for Bush to come out ahead in an overcrowded Republican race.
All right, Josh Kraschauer, did Washington awaken this morning with Jeb fever?
Well, I don't know about Jeb fever, but he certainly has the opportunity. He gave a very good speech and a well-received speech yesterday, and he has the opportunity to get some political momentum that's been badly lacking ever since he announced this exploratory committee that he was considering running for president. But what you saw yesterday from Jeb Bush was, even though he didn't mention his brother, you saw a large dose of compassionate conservatism. It wasn't a liberal message. It was a very conservative message, but it was, like his brother, focused at groups that traditionally Republicans don't always speak to. Immigration and education reform are two of his biggest and most, the two issues that excite him the most, and he's touting conservative reforms in those two areas, in areas that have gotten him in trouble with the base, but are ones that are strictly within the Republican firmament. So, you know, Jeb Bush's big gamble is whether Republicans are willing to go back to a softer version of conservatism that his brother introduced to the country in 2000, or whether that time has long passed and the Republican Party and even the conservative movement have moved into the right.
Yeah, because when you crunch the numbers from the 2012 election where Barack Obama beat Mitt Romney, a lot of votes were missing from those minority groups that you mentioned. I noticed, Josh, that he made his announcement from an ethnically mixed college in Miami.
Miami-Dade College, and if you watched the hour or so of introductions before Jeb Bush took the stage, there were many Hispanic leaders in the community that had personal relationships with Jeb Bush to really, it looked like it was a convention speech if Jeb was already the presidential nominee, and it was very well choreographed. But the Republican Party leaders know, and Jeb Bush certainly knows, that Republicans need to do much better with Hispanic voters than Mitt Romney did in 2012. They need to do better with Asian American voters, which Obama won overwhelmingly in 2012. And to do so, the bet is, at the very least, changing the tone and focusing more from the middle when it comes to immigration reform is a good start to begin that process.
Rick Wilson, on that point, of course, for now, the first obstacle is not to win the general election. It's to win the Republican nomination. Is it a winning gamble on his part?
Well, listen, it is always a mistake in Republican primary campaigns to think that you're going to start playing the general game too soon. There are a lot of folks who are very concerned that Jeb has already made what we call the pivot to the general election. And there is, as they say, many a slip betwixt the cup and the lip in a Republican primary, where you're not going to be debating necessarily the issues you want to talk about, but the issues that are relevant and cogent in the minds of Republican-based voters. And they're going to talk right now a lot about national security. They're going to talk about Obamacare. They're going to talk about immigration, and those aren't necessarily going to be in the lanes that Jeb Bush wants them to be in this part of the campaign. You can't dispute that in the general election we have to do a lot better with Hispanic voters. I look forward to the debate with either Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton in Spanish on Telemundo. That'll be an interesting moment. I mean, this is a Republican Party and a field right now that is a lot more fluent and a lot more relevant, in understanding what motivates Hispanic voters than Hillary Clinton, who is the whitest woman in the universe, might understand. So we're certainly going to have an interesting set of cultural markers if it's either Jeb or Marco as the nominee in our party.
I'm sensing, though, Stuart Haugen, that from listening to what, and I'm putting words in his mouth, Rick Wilson said, that it's going to be a heavy lift winning the Republican nomination. There's a lot of people who don't agree with the former Florida governor on issues like immigration.
Well, yeah, I think he has the dynasty issue, which already puts some people off. So the new face.
Smart move, leaving the word Bush off those campaign posters.
Yeah. On the other hand, he has used that exact logo for virtually his entire political career. But I think it is good that it's there. The two issues that Rick, I think, mentioned that are most important that I can think of are his while he touts education reform, and we desperately need education reform, he's a supporter of Common Core, and that doesn't play well with the hard right base. And this issue, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, he supports a full path to citizenship for illegal immigrants, and I don't think that's a very popular position amongst the farther right sides of the party. So I think it's going to be a heavy lift, and I think the question is, let's get right down to the basis. To win this election, I don't know, I'm throwing numbers out, I could be way wrong, but I sense that Republicans will need to win somewhere near 30% of the Hispanic vote, which is a doable thing if we get the candidate right. But I think we're going to have to get very near 30% to overcome the institutionalized black vote for a Democrat.
Laetitia Vito, on that point,
Yes, I agree. Both with Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, the Republican candidates, would get probably more than 30% of the vote, so it would do better than Romney in 2012. So that's one of Bush's assets. On the other hand, I don't think that the dynasty issue will not be a problem. I think that not only is it a problem and will it be a problem for the nomination, but not embracing his family, his legacy, and his family history will be even more of a problem. And the fact that he left out the Bush name in his logo, and the fact that he tries desperately to distance himself from all of it and present himself as a reformer, someone who will bash the Washington elite. And I mean, who is he kidding? It would be more sensible in this case to fully embrace who he is. As is often said, Americans like successful families, as was just said.
Well, let's also remember that George W. Bush is now more popular than Barack Obama in the United States. Surprise, surprise. So,
yeah, but not at the same point in the presidency, of course.
I'm talking about today, and I think that's all that counts.
All right, a long way to go until January in the first caucuses and primaries. Still all to play for in a crowded field that got a little more crowded this Tuesday with the announcement by real estate tycoon Donald Trump that he's running from, guess where he made his announcement? Trump Tower in Manhattan. And with another Florida politician we've been mentioning, Marco Rubio, already in the running. The influential 538 blog points out that big-name endorsements from Congress have been split in Jeb Bush's home state, and he hasn't gotten, so far, big endorsements, as many as he thought he would get. The latest polls, by the way, for the crucial first primary in the state of New Hampshire, and again, it's early days, they show Bush only slightly ahead of Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, who is yet to announce. Another potential candidate, Ohio Governor John Kasich, has said, "I thought Jeb would take up all the oxygen. He hasn't." Josh Krasauer, listening to our discussion here, do you get the sense that, and especially the point that Laetitia just made, that Bush has the same problem with his last name that Hillary Clinton does?
There's strong evidence to that point. And the $64,000 question is going to be whether the speech, the launch that he gave yesterday, will change the impression, which has been fairly negative in these early primary states and also nationally. Can he make the case that he's not just like his brother, that people will vote for another Bush, even though there's such a crowded field of alternatives? If Jeb Bush's favorable ratings don't go up after the speech in the next few weeks, he doesn't have a burst of momentum within the Republican field, I think that's a big red flag that the Bush name is a real fundamental weight on his candidacy. He had this chance to get the relaunch, or the launch rather, on Monday, and if he can't move voters at his best opportunity to do so, I think there's some fundamental challenges that he faces beyond ideology within the Republican field.
But Josh, again, you have to explain it to us here in Europe. We're in June of 2015. The first primary is not till January. He has time to make up ground, as we saw, for instance, John McCain do back in 2008.
He has money, and that is his biggest asset right now. and he's going to have an advantage financially to get that message out, to put his best face forward in the coming weeks and months. And yes, you're right. There is a long calendar. There are months until the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucuses. But if you look at the polling data, there's some real fundamental concerns about Bush's name and how people view it. If you talk to the Bush campaign, they think this is memories of his brother and his father, and they don't really know his record as governor of Florida. And that's an open question. That's a central question on whether he can get the momentum or not back. But if it is resistance to nominating another member of the same family, given that there's so many other alternatives, that could continue to dog him even as we get closer to the New Hampshire and Iowa contests.
Rick Wilson, why is the field so crowded for this for on the Republican side? Josh just mentioned that you need a lot of money to become president of the United States. Clearly, not all those candidates have it. Why are so many throwing their hat in the ring?
Because they learned a lesson. They learned a lesson in 2012 that the Republican field is now driven not just by money, which is money is still a hugely important and consequential factor, but it's also driven by a sort of volatility, as people are now able to go outside of the regular media channels and see how these people perform in debates and interact with them more on Facebook and Twitter and social media. And so they recognize there's a lot of volatility in the field. They don't look at Jeb Bush as the Death Star that is going to automatically flush everybody else out of the race, obviously. They all seem to have a theory of the case that they've got a particular flavor of secret sauce that's going to appeal to Republican primary voters. And it varies, in levels of self-delusion, but there are of the 11 or so candidates right now, there are 4 or 5 who are actually very serious people. Now, some of them are just doing this to sell books, or to get their name out there, or to warm up for another act, or to run for a cabinet position. But the top tier of these folks, who are very serious people, who are running serious campaigns, all look at this as something where there will be opportunities where Jeb Bush may have his month where he's hot, and Marco may have a hot month, and Walker may have a hot month, and hopefully, in their cases, they'll have some support from super PAC money and outside donors rather, who can reshape the race at the appropriate moment. Look, Newt Gingrich stayed in the race last time because Sheldon Adelson kept him aloft. He wasn't there because the politics were there. He was there because he had resources from an outside donor.
All right, so money does talk, but it'll only take you so far. We're going to pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.